Okay, good evening. Okay, Buddhist art. So Buddhist art is, like other traditions, expressed numerous mediums from temple architecture to sculptural depictions of the Buddha and bodhisattvas to murals, paintings. So as you may know, Buddhism originated in the 6th century BCE. What country? India. Eventually spread to numerous Asian countries where art forms were then adapted to the host culture. That's what's really interesting about Buddhist art, because there's foundation ideas, but each culture tends to express those differently. So tonight we're going to begin by looking at some of the earliest forms and then make a tour of a number of countries where Buddhism has made a significant artistic impact. So, the earliest phase of Buddhist art, lasting until just about the 1st century CE, so about for the first 500 years, was aniconic. Aniconic means not human form. The Buddha was not shown in human form for about 500 years. Instead, there are various symbols of the Buddha. For example, here you see a footprint. I think we've seen numerous footprints in various traditions. And then what is known as the Dharma wheel, which represents the basic teachings of the Buddha that he gave in his first sermon, which we'll get to later. Essentially, the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Noble Path. If you know those. If you don't, go to Google, look them up. Okay.
Is that a real foot?
What do you think? It doesn't matter what it is as much as what it is felt or believed to be when you're studying religion. I mean, I don't get into the question, well, is that real or not? People believe it's real, they worship it. Okay, that's what I'm interested in. I don't think they put the Buddha. That's, you can see the Dharma wheel on the footprint, right? Yeah. So that's. But this was how for over 500 years, and a lot of people don't realize that. Whenever they think of Buddhism, they think of the sculpture, and there's marvelous sculpture. But for almost 500 years, you didn't get the Buddha. Okay. Let me give you a very classic example. It was this piece of art. It was called the Miracle of Kapivatsu, where King Suddhodana, who is the Buddha's father, is praying as his son, the Buddha, rises in the air, praised by celestial beings. Do you see something rising in the air? All it is the platform, which is called the path, the Buddhist path. He's not on it. It's rising in the air. It's implied because you don't show the Buddha's form. You can show other forms, like those surrounding him, but that is rising and there's no Buddha on it. This was the sort of early aniconic form. You see beneath it there's a tree. That's the famed Bodhi tree, which we will also see later. Another example was this piece called Queen Maya's Dream. You see Maya lying there at the bottom? Maya was Buddha's mother. And according to the tradition, one evening she had a dream, a white elephant, see the elephant above, entered her side, and she then went to the Brahmin priests and said, what's going on? This sort of going to your therapist, right? What's this dream mean? And they said, you will have a son who will either be a great prince or a great teacher. And when you say teacher in India at that time, that meant a guru or a religious leader. And the story goes, the father wanted him to be a great prince and tried to hide him from the rest of the world. He eventually gets out, sees the suffering of the world, and decides to go on the path of being a Buddha. But it's the art here that we're interested in, and there's no Buddha in that art either. Okay? So that's the earliest. In architecture, the early architecture was known as a stupa, and they still exist today, and we'll see some later. These were mounds. Notice, again, if you see the images, there's no Buddha image here. These were mounds in which there were relics. You know, like in cathedrals in Europe, the relics of the cross or something related to Jesus' robe or something. Buddhist relics were called. This is a famous stupa in Sanchi in Madhya Pradesh, India. There were also these, the Ashokan pillars. Again, if you notice, there'll be lions on top, there'll be other figures, but no Buddha. These were pillars that the great Emperor Ashoka spread across the entire subcontinent. It helps your religion if an emperor becomes a follower. We saw that in Christianity, right? When Constantine became. So the Emperor Ashoka became a Buddhist, and it was due to him that Buddhism started to spread out of India. To the south to Sri Lanka, or what was Ceylon at one time, and to the north up into Afghanistan, eventually along the Silk Road to China, then to Korea, then to Japan, and to Southeast Asia up through Ceylon. So he was a really well-known figure in Buddhist history. We start to get anthropomorphic representations. Anthropomorphic meaning human figure, about the 1st century CE in northern India. And this is one of the earliest pieces that we have. It's called the Bhimmaran casket. You can see images of the Buddha on that in the gold leaf. It's a reliquary where relics were kept in this piece. Now the main, do you see on the map, can you see where it says Gandhara? That became the main center of Buddhist art. And it was very much influenced by the Greeks, who had come into this area in the 3rd century BCE with his conquering armies, got all the way to India, Alexander the Great. And he brought with him Greek culture, which remained. So when we start to get Buddhist sculpture, you'll see a Greek influence in the hair, in the robes, and these are known as the Gandharan works. They date from, like I said, about the 3rd century. And this is when Buddhist sculpture really starts to develop. Before this time, you'll find lions, you'll find the Dharma wheel, you'll find images that represent the Buddha, but are not pictorial of the Buddha. So this is the famous Gandhara. Now, do you notice the one on the far right? Yeah.
Halloween.
That was during his period when he went through, the story is he goes wandering looking for truth, and he becomes an ascetic. He hardly eats anything. He gets down to that skin and bone level, but he finds that this isn't really answering his basic problems. It's just the flip side of hedonism. Yeah? It's an extreme. And then he will find his path being the middle path. But anyway, it's a very interesting sculpture. So these are known as the Gandharan. And this is when we start to also get the first Buddhist temple. This is the great Buddhist temple, the Mahabodhi temple in a place called Bodh Gaya. Can you see on the map where Bodh Gaya is? This is the spot where Buddha had his enlightenment. It's called, and as a result, a great temple was built here. That's the Bodhi tree. When he had his enlightenment, he sat under this tree for 40 days and 40 nights. 40? Interesting. 40 is a common sacred number. And it is said, and I'll believe it because they believe it, that this is actual descendant of the original tree by, what do you call when you, clippings, yeah. Who knows? But it's believed to be. And it's a gorgeous spot, and right underneath it is something called the diamond throne. This is the ancient stone slab located under the Bodhi tree, where it is thought that Buddha meditated and had his enlightenment. And there, all over the temple, there are various bas-relief sculptures.
This is in sandstone?
Yeah, sandstone. Rock cut architecture was very significant starting in the 5th century. The best known grouping of this sort of architecture is found at something called the Ajanta Caves. Can you see the gray line there? That's all caves. Those are all caves. So these temples, monasteries were cut into these caves. Now some of the caves were already there, so they didn't have to cut right from the surface. But when you see some of the results, it's quite amazing. It's a Buddhist worship hall. A Buddhist monastery. So these caves were originally just caves. The monks went in and over decades at least, carved out these monasteries and worship halls. And this is where they lived. This was their monastery. And there are numerous rock sculptures inside. Can you see the hand up? That means no fear. No fear. Fear is the greatest, both in Buddhism and Hinduism. Fear is one of the greatest kleshas. A klesha is something that is a very negative emotion. Fear causes more damage in the world than perhaps anything else. When you're fearful of something, it easily becomes your enemy. You easily isolate it. You other it. So no fear. Don't be afraid. You're okay. Buddhists believe that because they're in their Buddha nature. Whatever happens out here doesn't matter. That's all contingent. You can't control it. You might think you can. And we try our best. But that's not your ground. The ground is no fear. Okay, and then this one, this is the reclining Buddha. Now he's not sleeping. This isn't showing him relaxing. He's dying. He's dying. Whenever you see the reclining Buddha, this is this image of the Buddha right before he died and entered nirvana. So it's a very sacred sculpture. There are also fresco murals on the walls. As you can imagine, a lot of these are not in the best of shape because these are, very old. But they usually represent what are called stories from the Jataka tales. The Jataka tales were ancient stories about the Buddha's previous lives. Okay, the Buddha didn't just start. He's had many lives, and many were in animal form. And you know what stories come from these? Aesop's fables. The Jataka tales spread north through Central Asia, eventually into Europe. So this is the Jataka tales, and they're pictures of paintings of the various figures. And these are just gorgeous. Okay, so let's now take our tour of countries. And we're going to start in Afghanistan, because Buddhism, as it spread north, went initially up in what is Pakistan and Afghanistan. And these are, in the 7th century, these are known as the Buddhas of Bamyan. These are rock sculptures in the side of cliffs. Now, these were here and sacred and not bothered until about the 7th century. Because in the 7th century, Islam becomes dominant in this area. And if you know anything about Islam and images, okay, but for most of the centuries, they were allowed to exist because they were so magnificent. Then along came the Taliban. But let me just say a couple things about these two statues. They represented the later evolution of classic Gandharan art in major form. The large statue was named Salsal. The light shines through the universe. 150 feet tall, referred to as male. Smaller statue is Sha Mama, Queen Mother, 120 feet tall. But the Taliban were very extreme, still are extreme fundamentalists, Puritans. That's another piece of art from this time, but this is what they did. They shot it down with cannons. Yeah. Some of the world's greatest art blown up. They also, these are famous sculptures. They're known as the sculptures of Hada. These were destroyed, taken out of the museums and destroyed, and numerous other Buddhist artifacts. So it's sort of ironic, one of the earlier areas that Buddhism spread, once the Taliban got power, they more or less got rid of any image of the Buddha whatsoever.
Bill, the one on the left has magnificent carving.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, incredible.
Incredible, yeah. Just go in, so what do? They go in and destroy these things because you shouldn't represent the human form in the divine way. Okay, so that's Afghanistan. So that's going north. That's Ashoka's missionaries went north. They also went south into what today is Sri Lanka, in Ceylon. It was one of the first countries to receive Buddhist teachers from Ashoka. And here we have the Avukana statue. It's a standing statue of the Buddha in north-central Sri Lanka, 46 feet in height, and depicts the Buddha, again, with hand raised in reassurance. Yeah. Fear not. Another monumental statue in Sri Lanka is found at Kandy. This is an 18th century hilltop temple, and that Buddha sits on top of the temple. He's sitting cross-legged, as you can see, in lotus figure. He stares straight ahead with little expression on the face. When you look at the images of Buddha, the eyes are often half closed, which is the meditation position, but there's no expression. There's just sort of that, I'm here. I'm solid. No expression in the face. Then there are these famous caves. They're called the Dambulla Cave Temple, or the Golden Temple. They're situated 92 miles east of Colombo, which is the capital. I should have put a map up there, but I didn't. It's the largest, best preserved cave temple complex in Sri Lanka. Cave temples were very popular because they were this is where monasteries would exist. You build them into caves rather than in Europe, you have the monastic buildings. These are often found in caves in every Buddhist country. The rock behind the Golden Buddha, where the caves sits about 500 feet above the lower plane. There are more than 80 caves in the surrounding area. 5 major caves contain statues and paintings related to the Buddha's life. There are a total of 153 Buddhist statues in these caves.
The ceiling on the left, how did they get the effect of that?
I don't know. I don't know. I look at these things in amazement. How did they do that? I mean, the devotion it took, first of all. And
it was done by hand.
It was done by hand, and nothing is signed. This was done out of complete devotion. No signature. This is my work. Because that's the exact opposite of Buddhist philosophy. The my is the problem. The my is the problem. Okay. And there are wall murals as well. This is the temptation of Mara. Mara is the Buddhist devil. Just before Buddha is about to gain his enlightenment, Mara shows up and says, it's very similar to the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. He offers the Buddha power. He offers the Buddha just about anything he wants, including 3 of his beautiful daughters who make Bo Derek look like a 1. And of course, he refuses them all, and he gains his enlightenment. And then there's the first sermon, which he gives after his enlightenment. There's supposed to be 5 followers. 5 of his followers? One's hiding. Yeah. Okay, let's move to China. So, according to tradition, the Han Emperor Ming, whose reign was 58 to 75 CE, precipitated the introduction of Buddhist teachings into China. So the emperor brought them into China. A 5th century text records the following. In olden days, Emperor Ming saw in a dream a god whose body had the brilliance of the sun and who flew before his palace. And he rejoiced exceedingly at this. The next day he asked his priest, "What god is this?" The priest said, "Your subject has heard it said that in India there is somebody who has attained the Tao, the way, the path, and who is called Buddha. He flies in the air. His body had the brilliance of the sun. This must be that god." The emperor then sent an envoy to India to inquire about the Buddhist teachings. Now, how do you get from China to India in those days? You walk, or you take horse, over the Himalayas. So going to India wasn't like, well, take the plane down to Delhi and get some of these scriptures. No, he sent his envoys to collect Buddhist scriptures. And they returned, and the scriptures were carried on the back of white horses. And the first temple is there's called the White Horse Temple in Luoyang, and you can see where Luoyang is on the map there. He also I should mention that with the scriptures came 2 monks. And they acted as the teachers for the court, and that's how Buddhism began to spread in China. That's the main Buddha in the shrine. And there's a second Buddha, known as Maitreya Buddha. He's the Buddha of the future. Just as there had been past Buddhas, there will be a future Buddha.
These Buddhas seem to be slimmer.
Yeah, like I said, each culture will give its own impression of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas. So one of the exquisite examples of Buddhist art in China are the Longmen Caves. Literally meaning the Dragon Gate Grotto. The Dragon Gate Grotto. You can see them from a fair distance there. Here they are a little closer up. They're located 7.5 miles outside of Luoyang, the city of Luoyang, where the temple is. The Yi River flows northward, and these are along about a little bit over a half mile stretch of the river is where you find these. There are 100,000 statues in 2,345 caves. And again, those are all hand chiseled. 30% of the caves date from 386 to 545, and the rest from 618 to 907. So 600-year period. So if we went back 600 years, where would we be? 1400s. Yeah, so that's how long these, and they're really sort of the finest examples of Buddhist sacred space. The main image is known as Leshan Buddha, 233 feet in height. You see the people? You get an idea of how big this Buddha is. Again, all carved out of the side of that mountain.
Are the caves a particular type of rock?
Yeah, they're sandstone-y type, soft enough to be able to work through, yeah. Still, I don't know that I'd want that job. No. And then just down from the Leshan Buddha is the Shangshan Temple. It's named after the spices that are found on this hill. It was reconstructed sometime about 1707. A lot of these temples, and this is true in Japan as well, burned down because they're made of wood. And if you've got wooden structures that are lasting centuries, it's quite likely they're going to be prone to fire. Okay, now we go to Korea. Remember, Afghanistan, Silk Road, turn right, China, Korea, so Korea's next. And it was introduced to Korea in the 4th century during what is known as the Three Kingdom period. There are 3 separate kingdoms in Korea at the time, by Buddhist monks from China. And as Buddhism was not seen to conflict with the nature worship of the time, and this will be the same in Japan, it was allowed to enter the country, and gradually over time we get what we call a syncretism between Buddhism and the naturalism of the original Korean religion. And the mountains were believed to be very sacred in Korea. And interestingly enough, most, not all, but most Buddhist temples and Hindu temples as well, or a lot of them, are on mountains. Why? They're closer, they're high, they're closer to the celestial world. And also, it takes a little bit of effort to get there. When you went to a temple in any of these countries originally, you didn't get in the bus or the car and drive up on the ass. You walked. It was a pilgrimage. It was meant to be difficult. It was part of a religious practice. It took discipline. It took some suffering, actually, some physical suffering to get there. So many of the temples in Korea, or shrines, are found in mountains. Not all of them, and we'll see exceptions to that. One of the neatest ones, when we were in Korea, Jerry Clifford and myself and BJ and my son were able to visit this small temple. It's called the Sukuram Grotto. It took us about an hour to get up there, walking along paths. Chris wasn't with us. She was back at the casino. No, 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 no.
It was raining heavily.
Yeah.
I wasn't feeling it.
Yeah, yes, that's true. In fact, and I rubbed Jerry this, it was, when we got there in the bus at the foot of the, it was really coming down. Jerry said, I'm not going out in that. I said, Jerry, we've come all the way to Korea to see this. We're going. And interestingly enough, after about 15 minutes of pretty hard rain, it cleared up, and we got up to this beautiful grotto. And it's magnificent. It's not big, you can see it, it's small. But do you see the mound behind it? There's this is just another picture of the grotto and a side building. But that's what's in that mound behind it.
It's not just a hill of dirt.
Yeah, no, it's not just a hill of dirt. It's a dome with the Buddha in it.
Is the mound rock?
It's got a rock support. Okay, you know, it's got pillars, etc. Construction began in 742 and took 30 years to build this. It's near another major temple. The grotto is actually I thought was much more quaint. But it's near this other major temple known as the Bolguska Temple, and this was, again, constructed in that 30-year period. All of these temples will have a major Buddha image. This is where people come. They will often say prayers or mantras. They will make offerings, often incense or sometimes flowers. Yeah, the monks, yeah. It's interesting because different countries' monks wear different colored robes. In Korea, they're gray. They're gray robes, the gray-robed monks. In Japan, they tend to be black. In Tibet, they're this sort of color, purple. In Ceylon, Sri Lanka, they're often orange. Yeah, different color. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so further south, we come to this temple, which is obviously not a mountain temple. It's a seaside temple, the Haedong-Yonggong Temple, located on the coast just northeast of the city of Busan, or sometimes you'll see it Pusan. That was a great landing at Busan during World War II with Makar. Okay, so it's a beautiful city. It's a lovely city. So just south of this is this magnificent temple. It was built in 1376 originally. Now most of these temples have been remodeled over time because, you know, things fall apart. I mean, I've been in my house 20 years and it's starting to fall apart. So you can imagine in over the centuries. It's a gorgeous place. And it was founded by this monk by the name of Naong. He actually established a number of temple monasteries throughout Korea. So he's very well known as an establisher of temples and monasteries. This temple was destroyed during the Japanese invasions, not the recent invasions, of 1592. Japan has always had its eye on Korea. And there's still quite a bit of hostility regarding the Japanese, especially what happened in the latter years in World War II. It was rebuilt in the 1930s. So let's take a look at some of its features. Here's the shrine.
When you visit such a place as that, are you asked to take off your shoes?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yes. If you go into the shrine.
Wear a head covering?
No head covering. You take off your shoes in both Hindu and Buddhist shrines. This is called the Buddha cave. All these little small Buddhas. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, you find there. That's one genre of Buddhist sculpture, the chubby little Buddha. See this guy? I'll show. These are some of the ones that we have. Well, might as well. I've mentioned the Buddha touching the earth. You see his hand? Right here. Right here, where my finger is. His hand touching the earth. Do you remember what that represents? Groundedness, centeredness. The earth is solid. You're grounded. Okay? You're not being thrown around by all this stuff out here. This is samsara. It'll throw you around. You know that. It'll throw you one way or another. It's called the contingencies of existence. You got to be grounded. So when the Buddha's in meditation, he's grounded. That's really, to me, the import of what's important about meditation. Finding your ground, what's solid within, and being able to go there when you need to. Okay, I'll get to some of those others later. So, okay, yeah, Maitreya Buddha, this guy, chubby Buddha, happy Buddha, future Buddha, smiling Buddha. I wouldn't say he's the eat, drink, and be merry Buddha. That's going a little too far. But some people say that what this really symbolizes, which is very Zen, think with your stomach. We have a different phrase for that. What do we say? Know it in your gut? If you know something in your gut, you don't overthink it. There's a lot of significance in Buddhist meditation. Your mind will get in the way all the time. All of these thoughts will keep coming. You start thinking something, you will overthink it, you will go down a rabbit hole thinking about it. Use your gut. Go to your gut. Okay. These are the stupas, the seaside stupas, which will have relics in them. And this is one of my favorites. The seawater Buddha goddess. Okay, on New Year's Day, not our New Year's Day, but Buddhist New Year's Day, there are generally major celebrations at dawn, and thousands of people will come here to see the sunrise. And then on certain special temple days at night, all the lanterns. Okay, from Korea, next stop, Japan. In the history of Buddhism in Japan began in 522 CE, when the Korean king sent a mission to Nara, which was the capital of Japan at the time, including some Buddhist monks and nuns. They spent time with the empress at the time, Suiko, along with her regent, Prince Shotoku, and they were very much impressed by what they were told by the monks, and they accepted Buddhism, and Buddhism became part of the court in 607 CE. First thing they did was send an embassy to China to gain copies of Buddhist texts and relics. Not Korea, China. And over the following centuries, Buddhism and traditional Shinto, have I said anything about Shinto in any? Shinto was the traditional religion of Japan. Maybe I should give a class on Shinto sometime. It's a magnificent artwork. But anyway, these two blended together. into a syncretic religious tradition, which is still very much alive today. If you go to most Buddhist temples, you'll find a Shinto shrine on them. So they've come together. There's a famous saying in Japan. One is married Shinto and buried Buddhist. If you see a marriage ceremony in Japan anywhere, it's going to be Shinto. If you, I don't know if has anyone been to Japan and seen, they're marvelous. But burial and death, that's a Buddhist issue. So it's this very interesting combination of the two. So Japan's known for its giant bronze Buddhas. I'm sorry that Dave isn't here tonight, David Fall, because he was telling me he's visited the Kamakura Buddha. I guess he was in Japan during the war, and he said he had gone to see this marvelous bronze statue of the Amitabha Buddha, which means the Buddha of infinite light. Stands on the grounds of the Koto-in Temple in Kamakura, 40 feet tall, weighs approximately 100 tons. Why doesn't it weigh more? It's hollow. It's hollow inside. Yeah. According to temple records, the statue dates from 1252.
So they would make a mold first?
Yeah. Yeah. That just gives you sort of an idea of the detail. That's the eye and the pigeon on top. And you don't believe me? There it is. And you can go inside. Yeah. Another monumental Buddha, one of my favorite and one of Chris's favorites, is found at this temple, the Todai-ji temple in Nara. Remember, Nara was the ancient capital. If you go to Japan today, Nara is not far from Kyoto. And Nara is not that far from Osaka either. If you're going to Japan to visit, make sure you get to Nara and Kyoto. But in any case, this is the Todai-ji temple, originally founded in 738. Now that building has been burnt and rebuilt 4 times, destroyed by fire 4 times. Well, from the 8th century till the 21st century. Because these temples, they're made of wood, and wood goes up quickly, especially as it gets old. So it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and it's in a beautiful setting called Nara Park or Deer Park. Deer Park. It's a 1,240-acre park, one of the oldest in Japan. There are over 1,200 wild Sika deer that freely roam, and people feed them, and you're allowed to, but what they do is they sell these little wafer pellets that you should feed them. You know when there was a problem? COVID. The deer weren't getting fed. They started going into the city. They were in the subways. Yeah, because no one was out there to feed them, and they were hungry. I should have brought a picture of this deer down by the train. They're just wandering around.
They've been conditioned to.
That's your yeah. That's
wasn't there.
Yeah. They have these very interesting cries. It's sort of haunting. Do you know what a peacock sounds like? Almost like that. We were walking through the park at night, coming down from another temple, and we heard these cries. And at first, I thought someone was getting murdered, but it turned out to be these deer. So you enter through this magnificent gateway. That's not the temple. That's the gateway. And what a gateway does is it marks the entrance into sacred ground. Okay? Out here, where the people are, that's profane. Okay? Once you cross into under the gateway, you're in sacred ground. And that's the Great Buddha Hall. It's one of the most magnificent in Japan, if in not the entire world. We got there at 7 a.m. You got to get there at 7 a.m. If you get there at 9, every bus in the world is going to be there. That's why it's good to have Todd with me. He planned out the whole trip. He said, you got to get up at 6, Dad, because we got to be there at 7. Because if you're there at 9, you're not going to get to see anything. Because all the tour buses arrive around 9. You know,
When
so
you said they're made of wood mostly, are the roof tile?
they have not so much. Maybe this one, maybe the modern versions, but almost like shingle was the original. And there's the great Buddha. He's known as the Daibutsu Buddha.
The great wooden Buddha, where is he?
The great wooden Buddha in Japan. He's bronze. There might be another. He's probably in Kyoto because there's 2,000 temples in Kyoto. But I'm not sure. See, but Daibutsu means the great Buddha, 52 feet high, built through 8 castings over 3 years. Here's the interior. You might notice this princess. Gives you, next to that pillar, it gives you sort of a sense of the size of the pillar. What's very interesting, and I think if you saw any of Jean Bream's classes on Notre Dame, right? I don't know if this, anyway, if you see where that light is down by the far end, the sun coming through, there was a box there. And it was a donation box for Notre Dame. Because Notre Dame had just burned down, because, and I should have brought the sign, it said, our temple was burned down a number of times. Okay, we need to support Notre Dame. So, yeah. Okay, like I said, about 20 miles from Nara is Kyoto. And on a clear day in the spring, you can see Fuji. Yeah. It's like I said, it's known as the Temple City. It's the center of Japanese culture. If you're interested in culture, this is the place to be. Kyoto. 2,000 temples and shrines. The most visited, not necessarily my favorite, but the most visited is known as the Kinkakuji Temple, or the Golden Pavilion.
Is it gold?
It's gold leaf.
Oh, almost looks yellow.
Yeah.
But it's gold.
It's the most visited temple in Kyoto, perhaps in Japan. It's a Zen Buddhist shrine and UNESCO World Heritage Site, originally built in 1397. But it burnt down in 1950. And it was arson. And it was a monk. There's a novel written about it, about a monk who was, a bit off. But it was rebuilt. Tell you one thing, if you ever know anything about the Japanese, they will rebuild quickly. That I-10 would be done in a month. Seriously. They would just say, boom, we got to get this done. The infrastructure in Japan, if you've ever been, it's just so impressive. From the roads to the trains to the subways, the bullet trains. They know how to spend their money. Okay, in any case, it's got three separate floors with gilded gold leaf thus it's named the Golden Temple. The Japanese temples are very simple in design and interior compared to some of the more elaborate temples that you'll get in Tibet. Have you ever been into a Japan? They're generally speaking fairly modest in design. Still beautiful, but that's the interior. This is one of my favorite temples, and when the Ali group went to Japan a few years ago, I suggested that perhaps people want to go down and see this temple, the Sanju Joengo Temple, founded in 1164, dedicated to, here's another, let's take a look at this one. That's the front. Dedicated to Kannon, which is the Japanese name for the Buddhist Bodhisattva Kuan Yin. Here she is. She's kind of heavy. Kuan Yin is the Buddhist Bodhisattva of utmost compassion. Utmost compassion.
So is that a female?
Female. Mm-hmm. It's the female form of a male deity of Avalokiteshvara, which we'll see. Do you notice there's a little jar in her hand here? I don't know if you, this is a jar, and it's pouring out compassion into the world. But this is the Japanese name, Kannon. And this is what is fantastic about this temple. It's the 1,001 wooden but gold gilded bodhisattvas. Did you go there, Joy? No. Were you there with John's trip when they went there? Yeah. Yeah. It's a yeah. Oh, yeah. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. This is. It's in a very long part of the temple, and you walk all the way around it. There's if you don't believe it, I tried to count them, and I got to about 500 and said, "I believe you." So 1,001.
You got halfway.
Yeah. Yeah, it looks. Yeah, and why would they lie?
Yeah.
Although why 1,001? Why not? Anyway, it's a national treasure of Japan. This is a temple that most people don't go to, but if you're in Kyoto, this is a temple to go to. Another temple which hardly anyone goes to, very small temple on the western outskirts. It's known as the Adashino Nembutsu. This was founded in 1811. It's situated on a hill, but you can look down onto the city. It sits in an area, this is interesting, where since the 11th century, the bodies of the dispossessed dead, those who, the outcasts of society, were dumped on the hillside. And Buddhist monks decided to build a temple to those dispossessed. And this is what you have today. 8,000 Buddhist statues, each one to a dispossessed soul who didn't get a proper burial or proper cremation. That's compassion. During what is known as the Sento-Kuyo ceremony, dedicated to the spirits of the dead, which if you're interested is on August 23rd, 10,000 stone statues are lit up with candles. So our last site in Japan is again one of my favorite spots. I'm taking you to my favorites. It's a place called Mount Koyasan. It's a common name for a huge temple settlement just south of Osaka. If you fly into Japan, you're either going to fly into Tokyo or Osaka. Most people fly into Tokyo, but if you're interested in just seeing, if you don't want to see Tokyo, I'd fly into Osaka. It's just a bus ride to Nara and then Kyoto, and then the bullet train down to Hiroshima in an hour. That's the way to go. But anyway, this is just south, and it's up in the mountains. And it was first settled by this famous Japanese monk by the name of Kukai, who actually went to China to study school of Buddhism and brought back many of the scriptures. It's located on a 2,500 high foot plateau amid 8 mountain peaks. It's supposed to resemble a little bit of like a lotus plant. Can you see the area there that's not wooded? Looks a little bit like a lotus flower. A little bit. I mean, you got to use your imagination, people. Come on. The original monastery has grown into a town. It's known as Koya, containing 120 temples, many of which offer lodging. And that's what we did. We stayed at one of these monasteries in a very small room, but a beautiful garden outside. Got up at 6 in the morning to hear the monks chant. And if you've ever heard monks chant, if you haven't, there's a deep, and they do the Om. And when they do that Om, you swear there's a vibration in the room. So we were able to do that and stay in one of these monasteries. This is the major temple, the Kongobu-ji temple. If you go in the fall, it's great. The place is just covered with fall leaves. This temple has amazing sliding screens. Often Japanese houses don't have walls to separate rooms, they have screens. So these are, and here's some close-ups by a very famous Japanese artist of the 17th century. His name was Kano Tanyu. It has also numerous paintings. And it's the largest rock garden in Japan. 25,000 square feet. With 140 granite stones. And if you ever go to these, they are manicured. Every morning they are brushed. You will not see a ripple in them. This is a high form of Japanese art. I could have done gardens here, but didn't have quite enough time. But there are some beautiful gardens, especially rock gardens.
Well, do the animals scamper through?
Generally, there's someone there watching. And this is the famous pagoda. The famous pagoda. 148 feet tall.
Now, is a pagoda Buddhist, or is it just Japanese?
Well, no, it's Japanese. But Buddha, like I said, it was Shinto, really uses more pagodas. But they incorporate each other. So this is a Buddhist town, but there'll be this pagoda on it as well.
Pagoda is a temple from another faith?
China has a lot of pagodas. They're generally related to Buddhism and Shintoism.
So it would be considered a house of worship?
Yes, because that's in it. It's called the Cosmic Buddha. And one of the reasons I really love this place is its cemetery. It's Japan's largest cemetery. Contains not only headstones, but numerous sculptures. As well as this. A monument to the monks who have been buried here. 200,000 over the centuries.
Are they cremated, or
Yeah, they're cremated.
are they in those little
No, I think those are it's just a,
stone representations?
it just represents them, yeah. local mythology said they're really not dead. They're just waiting. They're just waiting. We arrived in Koyasan at about 6 in the evening. It was just starting to get dark. And we took a walk through that cemetery. It was really cool. I mean, it was just something about the place. It was almost like you could feel the spirits there. I swear, it was very interesting. Okay, having a good time? We're now moving to Tibet. And to Lhasa. Lhasa is the capital of Tibet. Most sacred space is this monastery, the Jokang Temple Monastery. It was traditionally maintained by the Gelug school, whose leader is the Dalai Lama. Before the Dalai Lama had to leave Tibet, that was his main residence. Since 1959, it's been under the control of the Chinese government. You can still go there, and they will have tours, but it's a little different. You're going to get the Chinese view. And since I generally respect the idea of listening to all views, their view is that these monks and these religious structures drain the wealth of the people. Remember, this is a communist country, and that this was just lavish religious nonsense. That was their view. It's not the Dalai Lama's view or my friend Barry's view. They haven't destroyed it because it does quite well for tourism.
Yeah, a little capitalist.
Yeah, and China's, yeah. And so there's some images from the roof. It was founded, the temple was originally founded by this gentleman, King Songtsen Gampo, 6th century. According to tradition, it was built for his 2 brides. His 2 brides. Both princesses are said to have brought important Buddhist statues from China and Nepal to Tibet. One was a Chinese wife, one was a Nepalese wife. They brought these great statues, so in response he built a monastery. And of course, over time, it became a monastery for monks. And over 900 years, it's been enlarged a number of times, with the last renovation in the 17th century by the 5th Dalai Lama. There's the courtyard. And as with most Buddhist temples in Nepal or Tibet, or even in India, you'll find the big prayer wheels. You spin these. And as you do, you say a prayer, usually for somebody in purgatory. Mahayana Buddhism has lots of spiritual realms. When we were in Bodh Gaya, where I showed you back at the beginning, years ago, my daughter Kim was only, how old was Kim? 10? 8. We were outside of a temple, and there was one of these, and she ran up to it and started spinning it wildly. I said, oh my God, Kim. I said, and then the monk came out, I said, I'm sorry. She said, no, let her spin it. Let her spin it. So she kept spinning it. Anyway, and this is the famous Buddha statue that you find in this temple. It's known as the Jowu Sakyamuni. The Shakyamuni is the Buddha, the historical Buddha. So this is supposed to be when he was 12. He's seated in lotus position. You can see 3-tiered lotus throne. Left hand on his lap, right hand touching the earth. The image is often covered in pearl-studded garments, and he wears a jeweled crown. I don't know if you can tell, but in his forehead, Can you see it? There's a diamond. And in both Hinduism and Buddhism, this is called the third eye. This is the eye that looks in. These eyes look out into the world of samsara. This eye looks in. It's called the meditation eye. This is the most important bodhisattva. Who is this, Chris? Yep. Which is the male form of Kuan Yin. But do you notice, what are all those arms and hands? There are 1,000. 1,000. They are the 1,000 arms of compassion, reaching out to a suffering world. If you've ever heard the Dalai Lama speak, he will say, you want to know what religion is? 2 words, kindness and compassion. That's religion. He says all the other stuff, it might be interesting. And this is the Dalai Lama. He says, you want to know about nirvana, reincarnation? That's secondary. Kindness, compassion. That, kindness and compassion. But in 1966, the Chinese Cultural Revolution, the Red Guards attacked the temple, and for a decade there was no worship there. It was used first as a barracks, then as a hotel, and then as a slaughterhouse. It's, again, you want to talk about compassion. The Dalai Lama has been asked, aren't you angry at those people? He said, no, they don't deserve anger. They need compassion. That's what they need. They don't deserve it. They may deserve anger, but what they need is compassion. Which is, now this is a man who was driven from his country and had to settle in northern India, and still there in Dharamsala. So the eyes and arms symbolize the universal compassion of a suffering world. And this was what was done with that. There was a fire in 2018. From what I understand, they've renovated it to some degree. It only took off, although that looks pretty bad, I guess it was mainly the roof, and they were able to save most of the things inside. So now we go to Nepal, neighboring Nepal, and the capital of Kathmandu, where there are 2 famous, what are known as stupas. Remember when at the beginning of the Buddhist stupa? There's the Buddhanath stupa, 7 miles from the center of the city. It's known for its massive eyes. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. One legend says the temple was built as atonement for a king's son who accidentally killed his father. The eyes, again, look out at the world. The eyes of compassion. The second is known as the Swayambhanath Stupa Temple, an ancient religious complex atop a hill in Kathmandu Valley, just west of the city. The Tibetan name for the site is the Sublime Trees. Like the Buddhanath Temple, the stupa has eyes and eyebrows painted on, if you look closely. There's some detail from the bottom of the stupa. It's also known as the Monkey Temple, and I can tell you about that. I was at this temple, coming down the stairway, when one of these critters, well, actually, it was the lady in front of me it was her fault. She had her backpack open, and there was food in there. No.
And they can smell it.
Oh, they sit on the side and they watch. And This monkey, I was behind her, about from me to you. He came running out, jumped on her backpack, started to get stuff. She went, ah, and he fell off, and he came back, and as he went by me, he had his claws out, scratched me. So the rest of the afternoon, I was at the hospital, getting a first of 3 rabies shots. Now the doctor said usually the bite is a problem, but you might just want to be careful. He may have had his, you never know. So anyway, it's called the Monkey Temple. They're not nice. They're all over the place.
Do they control them at all or limit the number?
No. So here's some of the shrines and statues. You could tell if it's the first on the hill. It's a very large complex. You could spend an entire day there. And our final temple is in Thailand. It's the Wat Arun Temple in Bangkok. It's among the best known of Thailand's landmarks. The main feature is its central spire. Which stands 219 feet high, and it's encrusted with colorful porcelain if you get close to it. It's an architectural representation of what's on the right, known as Mount Meru. Mount Meru in Buddhist cosmology is the center of the world. The axis mundi. Everything rotates around Mount Meru. So the spire here is supposed to represent that. Now, the spire is said to have 3 levels. Can you see the 3? The base indicates the realm of existence, samsara, all this stuff floating around. The middle is where your desires are extinguished, where suddenly you realize, I can't get no satisfaction. All this stuff here, it just keeps coming over and over, and it just, and after a while, okay, so at a certain point you want to get off. So you're on the second level. And then the third level indicates the 6 heavens, or 7 realms of happiness leading to nirvana. It's surrounded by 4 smaller spires that you can see there. There's an ordination hall, and inside is the Buddha gallery, and what is known as the Narumit Buddha. Again, you can see the different cultural influences on the images. Okay, one final these are the Buddhas that guard Queen Clarissa's Camarillo Palace.
You can do the one next door to Christmas.
I didn't take them all. No, I just took 3. Yeah, we've got about 7. They surround the house. They make sure evil spirits don't get in. And then inside we have also a lot. That's Kuan Yin. But you see the hands? 1,000. Again, 1,000 arms and hands. It's our most precious object.
And what's it made out of?
What is it made out of, Chris? Porcelain? Porcelain, yeah. It's the reason I didn't bring it, first of all, it's kind of fragile with those hands, but we also have it glued down.
That's a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Good idea. Nobody knocks it over.
Yeah. Well, you can see that's our fireplace behind it. So it's what, 2 or 3 feet? 4 feet? Yeah. Okay, before we finish, I do want to say something about 3 forms of, or genres of Buddhist painting. Okay. Whoops, oh, there's another bodhisattva. They're all over the place. Those are Tibetan. Okay, this is the mandala, the tanka, and the sand painting. So what is a mandala? They're typically circles, although you can sometimes they're square, representing symmetrical shapes, and they're considered sacred symbols because they have a sacred center. Every mandala will have its center. That's its ground. In that center, you'll find usually a Buddha or a bodhisattva, and then everything else swirling around it is samsara. It's the hub. It's the hub. Buddhist monks use this throughout Buddhist countries for meditation, and it's believed that when you meditate on this, you transform suffering into joy. Because the suffering is on the outside. If you stay on the outside of the mandala, just as you stay on the outside of life, if you stay in all the contingencies, you're going to suffer by definition because things don't last. Things change. Things you get attached to change. If that's where you are, then that's where suffering. But the notion is if you can get to the center, if you can get, which we all have, it's called our Buddha nature. In Christian terms, it's what Richard Rohr calls the universal Christ. It's that core. It's that core which cannot be troubled. Everything else can be changed and troubled, but that's what you grasp. And that's what the mandala does. And you meditate on it. Oh, they're similar, but I'm going to show you a lot of different ones. But the structure is similar. The center. Keep centered. So let's take a look at some.
Did you bring that home also?
Did I bring it home? No, I wish I had.
He just took a picture.
Okay, the tanka is a Tibetan Buddhist painting on cotton or silk. Here's a tanka artist. They usually depict a Buddha or a bodhisattva. So here we see Buddha Amitabha. The Buddha Amitabha is the Buddha of the Pure Land. Very popular in Japan. There's a temple in Oxnard on 6th Street? No. Not far from the little golf course, which worships Amitabha. And what's interesting, a lot of Buddhism is centered around meditation, and this is centered around devotion. You want to get liberated, you worship Amitabha. You pray to Amitabha, and he will take you to the Pure Land. The Pure Land would be the equivalent of heaven. So Buddhism has its varieties. It's not all just meditation. There are a great range of approaches. This is one of what are known as the 5 wisdom Buddhas. It represents the reality of consciousness. Most of us live unconscious most of the time. We're like little robots. Okay? We go past things, we don't notice them. And be conscious, be mindful, see reality as it is. And this represents that. And then we have Vasubhareva, who's the destroyer of death. He's scarier than death. That's the idea. He scares death.
He has horns.
Yeah. If in fact, a lot of temples you'll find these monstrous like figures outside. They're the guardians. They look scary because they're scaring away evil spirits. They're not supposed to That doesn't scare anybody. Okay?
Does he have arms or wings?
Probably both.
Oh, I see hands.
I can't. And then Manjushri, the Bodhisattva of wisdom. And one last one. I have a beautiful statue of this. It's called the Yub-Yum, but Chris said I couldn't bring it.
Sure is handy having you around.
You saved him a lot of work.
Do you see why I couldn't bring it? It's not a lap dance, friends. It's the marriage of wisdom and compassion. And the form I have is pretty erotic. But it's meant to be symbolic of wisdom and compassion coming together. Okay, last thing I want to say is something about sand painting, and then we're almost done. It's a unique Tibetan art form whereby monks use colored sand, which is dyed, to create a mandala. So here's a completed, two complete. Though that's all colored sand. Takes them weeks. In fact, it was a couple of years back, there was a demonstration in Santa Barbara, I think. One of the interesting elements related to sand painting is that after its creation, they're dismantled by blowing them away.
And what does that represent?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because Anne-Marie Eminelli, a meditation teacher, explains as follows. One of the fundamental principles in Buddhist practice is the idea that everything is temporary. Mandalas take a lot of time to create and then are transformed or released during ceremonies. Mandalas represent the process, not the end result. And after they're dismantled, usually the sand is put into a jar, taken someplace, perhaps a river, and dumped in. Sort of like with ashes for the dead. All right, that's it for Buddhism anyway. You're welcome to come take a look at these. This is a Japanese Buddha. It was, I thought it was given to me by John. McMullen. Chris said I had to buy it. Yeah, anyway, this is a famous, John said it was 17th century. Okay, so if you'd like to come up and take a look at these. Okay, next week we'll finish up with the art classes with Hinduism. So thanks for coming.